Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Allen. It seems everywhere you go these days, there is a push to get Canadians double vaccinated with the COVID shot. We have been told that the jab comes with a whole spectrum of benefits, from reducing symptom severity to even reducing viral load. Provinces are so eager to get everyone double vaxxed that many are now introducing vaccine passports. Meaning, if you got the COVID shot, then you will get to able to access the places that non-jabbed Canadians do not. But many, including myself, are decrying that this is going to cause a two-tier society. That those, for whatever reason, who choose not to receive the COVID injections are having their rights and freedoms severely limited. Some Canadians are even facing getting fired if they do not get the vaccine. Remember Dr. Ponesse, the ethics professor from Western University I had on a few weeks back? Well, she was recently fired from the university for not submitting to the vaccine mandate. We'll be hearing from her later on in the show. So is any of this really helping us combat the COVID virus? Does the COVID vaccine passport actually help those who are, as they're called, vaccine hesitant? And does it really matter? If someone chooses not to get the shot, is that such a big deal, and why? Are mandates really the path forward? Do they help or hinder doctor-patient trust in society? Well, joining me now to share his perspective is physician Dr. Shawn Whatley, author, past president of the Ontario Medical Association, and a Monk Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Whatley. I'm happy to have you back on.
Thank you.
This is a very serious discussion, and I'm glad to have a medical doctor on to kind of help unpack this all. But I guess the overarching question is really, are mandates the best way to approach COVID?
So great question. Mandates, at least the way I consider them, are one particular policy tool in a whole large toolkit of things that we can do to approach a pandemic. So you think about testing, contact tracing, isolation, quarantine. And so when you get to mandates, I think we would need a framework to say, why do we need mandates right now? Are hospitalizations going through the roof? Are deaths going through the roof? Have we failed a period or a trial of voluntary vaccination? Are our most vulnerable patients going unvaccinated? Well, actually, all those things are not the case. So although some people take a principled resistance against any kind of mandate, I think it seems reasonable to say, well, why do you need it now? And let's take a prudential approach. So based on the current evidence and circumstances, is this going to get us where we need to go? What is the goal of this policy?
So that's an interesting way to put it. And I might fall into that latter category as a person who just doesn't like being forced into anything and doesn't like mandating of anything. But like many Canadians out there, I'm also a reasonable Canadian. I think things, and I have logic, and I reasonably do a risk-benefit analysis, and what are the numbers saying, and what is the right response? So I guess then my question is, are we actually losing the battle with COVID, and is that the impetus to bring in a mandate? Are the deaths and hospitalizations, are they climbing?
Well, it seems like we are not losing the battle compared to how things were last spring or even last fall. So wave 1, 2, and 3, we are actually doing much better now. Now, that's not to say we discount everything. We still need to be vigilant and protect our most vulnerable, et cetera. But you talked about being resistant to being told what to do. I think many people feel the same. And instead of creating laws or forcing people to do it, I think we'll get better success through relationship. Any of us who are parents know that making a rule doesn't necessarily get the outcomes you hoped for. And certainly, at least with my patients, when they are worried about whether it's vaccines or taking statin drugs for their cholesterol, they're worried for a reason. And the best way to deal with that is to sit down with them and say, what's worrying you? Why are you hesitant? What's going through your mind? What have you heard? Right. And simply making a rule may make them be resistant to all the other vaccines that could help them as well.
And I've heard this argument from various doctors groups suggesting that, well, the frontline administration of the vaccine really ought to have been through the general practitioners. Now, dealing with the sheer numbers that the government wanted to achieve, I don't know how that would have been possible. But we have 30 seconds before we go to commercial. But do you think that would have helped to have the doctors been that frontline administrators of the vaccine so that conversation could have happened?
Well, it depends if you're talking about the therapeutic relationship or the implementation itself. Certainly, given the cold storage and tracking, it would have been a huge administrative load. So
Right.
I'm glad the government took over it. But as far as the relationship goes, maybe we can unpack that after the break.
Okay, that's a good idea, and you cued me right on spot. So we're going to pick this up in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on vaccine mandates and the ethics of such. And joining me is Dr. Shawn Whatley. Dr. Whatley, just before commercial break, we were discussing whether the relationship between doctor and patient would have been the ideal, I guess, relationship in which to have that discussion about vaccine efficacy or safety and whatnot. And please continue with your thought.
Yeah, so certainly within a relationship that's based upon trust, I think that's the best place to deal with people's deep set fears or hesitancy for any kind of treatment modality. So the idea that cooperation tends to work better than coercion, but we could debate that even until the cows come home. But we need to step back and say, why are policymakers creating this policy now? What are they trying to achieve? What is their endpoint? How will they know they've achieved their endpoint? Do they have an exit strategy? Is there a sunset policy? So this kind of dialogue would actually elevate trust, I think, within the community, and people could make up their own minds. The public is a lot smarter than policymakers often let on.
Well, and I think this, I always like to say, well, why are people hesitant about this vaccine? What is driving these protests and this hesitancy? And in my opinion, we can talk about that. It seems that there hasn't been scientific consensus in my observation. And beyond that, the goalposts keep moving. And people are saying, well, I thought we first had to get 60% and then 70% and 80%. And recently we've heard Dr. Theresa Tam say we want 100% vaccine, I guess, penetration. So the goalposts keep shifting. I can empathize with Canadians who are a little saying, let's taking a step back and say, wait, what is this all about?
Yeah, so brilliant comment about the issue of trust. I'm stealing these points from an article in the New England Journal. They offer 5 sort of screens, and I'll just very briefly talk about them.
Problem.
They suggest that if we're failing to control the pandemic. Number 2, if there's consensus on the science on what we should do about it. Number 3, if the efficacy and the side effects have been communicated in a transparent manner, so there's public trust. Number 4, if we've promised the public that we'll take care of them if they happen to be one of these people who end up with a bad outcome or an adverse effect. And then 5, if a voluntary period of vaccination has failed, then perhaps we should go ahead with a little more heavy-handed approach. To your points in introducing this question, I'm not sure if we're there yet. And not only that, we haven't built the public trust necessary to take this kind of a move. I think we're taking this move out of frustration as opposed to true compassion to get to a particular goal.
And I think it's frustration with or fear of a new lockdown on the horizon. And again, I haven't had any indication that we will be locked down, at least not here in Ontario. But I think people are worried, and they say, well, everybody needs to get the jab so that we can avoid further lockdowns. But I guess, are we actually receiving the right data set? I mean, I saw, for example, recent figures show in Ontario that 1/3 of persons in hospital with COVID, and this is as of the last week, had received the COVID vaccine. So that's 1/3 of people in hospital with COVID have received both double vaccines. So I think people are looking at the figures, the bare figures they can get their hands on, but I feel that we're not receiving all the information in which to make that kind of informed decision.
So the challenge with data in a snippet is it's very hard to unpack. So for example, if you have very, very sick people with multiple organ issues that are,
Right.
multiple organs that are failing, you vaccinate them, they're still probably going to end up in the hospital regardless. So they're sick people to begin with. But I think beyond that data, you speak again to trust, but we need to ask, what are we trying to get to? So if people think, hey, if we all get vaccinated, everything will be back to normal. Well, will it? Are we sure it will be? How will we know it will be? How will we know if it's not going to be normal? And so these kind of questions need to be answered in a transparent fashion so that the public can say, yes, you guys have your heads on straight, as opposed to simply deferring, abrogating all responsibility of government to the experts and not having the politicians do the difficult job that they have to do of balancing risks and benefits, not just to lockdowns and vaccines, but everything else that's going on in society.
But is this actually happening? Like it doesn't seem like it is happening that the government is, at least in my observation, that they are taking charge of this situation. That like the goalposts keep moving, and it makes me step back and think that I don't know if they really have a handle on what's going on.
So it's just my personal opinion. I believe they were in a very tough space at the start. And so they said, hey, let's find some experts to tell us what to do. They could also shield themselves politically. But once you hand over the reins to a particular expert committee, whether or not they're actually in the government or parallel to the government, it's very hard to take those reins back and to make those difficult decisions between freedom and autonomy and safety and the economy and health of people with respect to COVID versus health of people with respect to screening for cancers or getting other treatments done.
Thank you so much for joining me today with your insights.
My pleasure.
Welcome back. Universities across Canada have started instituting vaccine mandates for both staff and students. I personally have heard from dozens of Canadians deeply concerned about these mandates and how it will affect their jobs and their studies. I think many have been waiting for the shoe to drop, and my next guest, Dr. Julie Ponesse, is proof that it already has. Dr. Ponesse, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm happy to have you back on. Since we last spoke, things have changed dramatically for you personally. Would you care to share with Canada what happened?
Sure. Well, I think that what's happened to me or in my corner of the world is something that's happening to a lot of Canadians, whether they're comfortable speaking out about it or not, but that doesn't diminish the reality. So I have been placed on temporary paid leave and strictly ordered not to step foot on campus or to attempt to teach my students. And so someone now has stepped in to take over what I was supposed to be teaching. And the pressure keeps coming from the administration at my school to submit to the vaccine mandates or face termination with cause.
And just to give our viewers context, you were a professor of ethics at Western University for 20 years, is that correct?
I haven't been at Western. This is a bit of a misnomer. I haven't been at Western all of that time. I've been teaching in some contexts. I've taught in some schools in the States and also at schools in Ontario as well. And I've been teaching at Huron, it's about 7 or 8 years now.
Okay, gotcha. So you're an ethics professor. And
so I teach ethics theory and applied ethics, including business ethics and some medical ethics, healthcare ethics context, and also ancient philosophy classes.
And when you received notice of this mandate, that there would be this mandate coming into university campuses, and I think you and I spoke around that time, that student, staff, whether you're a custodian on campus or you're the security guard or you're a student or you're a professor, this is the mandate that you would have to receive the vaccination if you want to step foot on campus, or else please don't come.
Yeah, I mean, to be specific, what the mandate requires is providing proof of vaccination. So I think it's important to be clear about that, because what that does is it demands access to your private health information.
Right.
So what some people object to is not, that's a different issue, right? Whether you object to vaccination or you object to revealing your private health information. And then some people object. In my case, I actually object to both of those things. But one is a gateway to the other, right? So you need to reveal your personal medical information in order to prove that you have been vaccinated.
Right, right. And I've always found this very strange that in society we've kind of headed down this path where we're normalizing or making the Canadian population comfortable with revealing private medical information. And I know, again, this is unprecedented times with COVID and this virus and whatnot, but it seems like we're normalizing this, revealing this personal information, and I am uncomfortable with that normalization.
Yes, I think you're right. I think we're normalizing intrusions into privacy. And I use the word intrusion because if it's unwanted access, it's a kind of intrusion, right? So we're normalizing intrusions into privacy. We're normalizing the non-voluntary access to a person's body by demanding that they be vaccinated. And, having experienced what the dialogue is like between my employer and myself, there is no room for voluntary informed consent. It's very coercive. There's language of bullying. There's language of force. And we have normalized the absence of informed consent in Canada. And informed consent is something that's protected by, we have international, national documents, our Constitution. We have, the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Protective Association, all of these organizations and the documents that they have created and stand by very carefully guarantee fully informed voluntary consent.
But why is that important? Why is informed consent so important?
Informed consent is very important. I think it's deeply connected to who we are as Canadians in particular, because we have built our society on the idea that people from all walks of life, all religions, all political orientations can frame the kinds of lives they want for themselves here without intruding into other people's lives. There are important limits there. But as long as it's possible to make the kind of life we want for ourselves. And a core aspect of that is making decisions about what happens to our bodies. And this is the cornerstone of the abortion debate, the end of life debate. When you start talking about, medicines and access to certain kinds of food products.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion about ethics and COVID mandates and COVID passports and vaccine passports, rather. And joining me is Dr. Julie Ponesse, ethics professor, with your PhD in ethics. Dr. Ponesse, just before we went to commercial break, we were discussing the importance and the centrality of informed consent as who we are as Canadians. And I think you hit a very good point there. In the abortion movement, it was always this mantra, my body, my choice. Mm-hmm. And I've heard this being thrown around lately, that lately it seems it's the opposite of that with respect to COVID vaccine mandates, that it's not your body, your choice. It's we know better, just go ahead and do it.
It's your body, other people's choice, right? And one of the reasons why it's so important, I think, that we have choices over our own, what happens to our bodies, is that we and we alone are the ones who will bear the burden of the consequences, right? It's not the government who's going to suffer the consequences if something bad happens to us. It's us as individuals, and that puts the onus on us to make those choices.
But let's discuss how ethics plays into vaccine mandate, and we could even talk about the vaccine passports. But how, you released a video, and in it you were discussing how this was a violation of ethics. Can you explain to our viewers how and why a vaccine mandate is a violation of ethics?
Yeah, so I think that, someone might say, well, hold on a minute here. What we're asking you to do is to do something in order to protect other people, to prevent harm to other people. And as soon as we're talking about, harm and protection, now we're in the sphere of ethics. Why won't you do this? You're just being selfish.
Right.
The problem in this case is that I don't think the vaccine mandates are scientifically well supported in the first place. Right. And so that we're asking people to bear a burden, and we're seeing, the scientific uncertainties surrounding the administration of these vaccines. Not only do we have demonstrated harms that have come from them, mm-hmm. but we're also seeing a lack of effectiveness. You look at the countries with the highest vaccination rates, like Israel, and you see what's happening, right? It's not clear that they're doing what they aim to do. So when you're asking someone to bear the burden, a harm, and you're telling them that if you don't bear that burden, you will lose your job, you will lose access to being able to, the opportunity to provide for your family, right. And maintain access in society. There are harms compounded all over the place, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Now, when we speak about coercive methods, and, this was a phrase I first encountered when I used to spend a lot of time lobbying at the United Nations, when we talked about the developing world and how a lot of the First Nations would use coercive methods onto the developing nations. I thought, my gosh, what a horrible thing. I hope that never happens here. And now you get the sense that things are becoming quite coercive. You're right. When you have, say the custodian at a university who's the janitor cleaning, and they're told you need to receive the vaccine or show proof of vaccination or you're out of a job, and maybe this is the only job that their family has to support them to put food on the table. That to me is heavily coercive. And I really am concerned by these measures that are being employed.
You know, I've heard from a number of people over the last couple of weeks that the people who are going to get the vaccines now are crying and breaking down when they're getting them because they're not there by choice. If someone wanted one, they would have gotten it before now. The people that are getting them now are getting them because they fear they will lose something bigger if they don't. They fear their marriage will break down. They will lose their job. They'll lose custody of their children. People are afraid of this. And I really deeply believe that we are living through an era of the politics of coercion. We have never seen anything like this in Canada. We've seen it in other parts of the world. It's part of our history books. But I never thought that we would be living through this. As I was born in the 70s in Canada, you never would have thought this would be possible. And yet it's possible and staring us in the face and framing every moment of our lives right now.
Dr. Ponesse, we're out of time, but thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us what initially was just a discussion on ethics and COVID, but also your personal story. And I guess you'll have to keep us posted on what happens with you. But thank you so much, and best wishes with everything.
Thank you so much.
When I hear about these coercive measures being employed to make sure that people get the double vaccines, it really, really deeply disturbs me. This can't be healthcare in Canada in 2021. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.